to the 40k Fireside podcast, where we discuss everything to do with competitive Warhammer 40k with your hosts Vic VJ and David Gaylord. Hello everyone, welcome back to 40k Fireside. It's your host Vic with you today, and I'm super excited to do this video. As you guys probably very well know, Aeldari is my favorite faction, and I had a great time playing them in the last balance window, and now they're going through a little bit of a rough patch, but I think there is still a huge amount to work with in Aeldari. I wanted to run through my thoughts, my strategies, one of my lists as well that I've made, which I think will work quite well in this meta. Maybe give people a little bit of optimism, because this is a really rough patch where I think people are feeling a little bit helpless with Eldar. And I just want to show that there are some ideas and directions that we can move forward in to be more consistent in singles. We've had some great rules released for Corsairs, so I also wanted to touch a little bit on that and how some of those units might fit into some of our lists in this meta. But in order to break this down, I'm going to start off by looking at a little bit of history. So we're going to go back to the previous balance window, which was actually a relatively large balance window for Aeldari, because we didn't get, not this balance update, but the previous one, we didn't really get any changes. So we had about 6 months of a very similar strong archetype of list, and Aeldari were in a good position during that time. One of the key units for that was this unit of 10 fire dragons and Fuegans sitting inside of a wave serpent, which was particularly good in this meta because Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights came out at the same time. That resulted in Eldar doing very well in that little meta, a very heavy vehicle skewed meta. And I just wanted to touch on a little thing with these highly techy kind of skill-based armies. Eldar Sisters, Thousand Sons, people hate when these armies have certain mechanisms that they don't like. They don't like people throwing a 6 in with Miracle Dice. They don't like people being able to cast their spells without actually having to roll any dice. And what happens is, if you get a very uninteractive or an unfair feeling mechanic, regardless of what the win rate is. So in this case, Aeldari was sitting at about a 55% win rate. You're going to end up with a very negative community response. It's very common for these armies to get over-nerfed in the following balance update, and the community not really to highlight that. In fact, a lot of people to be very happy with the over-nerf. So on GW's side, I completely understand you're going to go in hard on these things. Now, the issue with that was that in the previous balance window, while Aeldari were doing really solid, I think they were the third best army statistically, great, but they were strong, not broken, because at equal player skill, there were a lot of matchups that they lose. Sure, at any player skill level, you would always favor Eldar over Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights or any other vehicle skew. But if you put something like Berserker Warband with 100 Berserkers, 80 Berserkers, or GSC on the other side of the board, or 18 Thunderwolf Cavalry, Aeldari are going to get run over pretty consistently, even with a skill advantage against these armies. Shadowmark, big advantage. Recon Guard, unwinnable game for Eldar. So it's a difficult one to go into when you can see as an Aeldari player that there are a lot of bad matchups, but the community hates you. You're getting tier lists made by very large content creators that are overrating Eldar. It's unsurprising that despite having losing matchups, an acceptable win rate, that the army with a negative playstyle is going to get nerfed a little bit hard on the balance update. Now, the actual problem unit was Fuegan 10 Fire Dragons and a Wave Serpent. If you targeted nerfed that particular combination, Eldar would have been left, I think, in a very fair and balanced state. But we actually got the fabled quintuple nerf, which is where not only Skyborn Sanctuary, Fire and Fade going back into transport, those were corrected. We also got a nerf to Star Engines to make it Assault, which is a fairly useless upgrade. And Aspect Tokens couldn't be used on characters as well, which is actually a very significant nerf to the way that the army wants to play. It actually reduces the fun of the army quite a lot and reduces the value of quite a lot of the characters, including Phoenix Lords, a lot. It is sad because viably you could have run 5 Phoenix Lords, which I did in the last update, to great success, extremely fun to use. If they had just removed the uninteractive elements from the army, it would have been perfectly fine. On top of that, we had quite severe points increases. I would say that we got the heaviest points increases in the game, which is really tough, with increases to swooping hawks, warp spiders, lycus, fire dragons. We also got increase to storm guardians, eldrad. Quite a lot affecting not just aspect host and war host, but also spilling over to affect all of the archetypes of Aeldari and reducing the amount of stuff that we can take. Unfortunately, we did get a little over nerfed on that one, but I don't think that all hope is lost. Saying that, the statistics say otherwise. It's pretty bad for Eldar. So week 1 is going to be the kind of 5 weeks back from here when the meta really started to settle in. At week 2 is when Necrons had their upgrade with the Catan and the new detachments, and they came in with that 59.5% win rate. Eldar just progressively started having a harder and harder time over this particular balance window, and they've had 2 weeks at around a 38% win rate, with the last week having the lowest win rate in the game, below Imperial Agents, which is pretty bad, to be honest. The tournament wins have dropped off a cliff. We've got 1 tournament win with 16 Necron tournament wins in this balance window so far. Will it get better? Will it get worse? Hard to tell, but these numbers are pretty rough and they're clear. So with stats, I think you guys would have seen my video talking about statistics and the value of them. I think they're extremely valuable when you look at armies that are tipping over 60% and tipping down below 40%. Those are the ones that really need correction. A lot of the other stuff is noise in the middle that doesn't really tell you this full story, but win rate is an excellent tool for working out if something is broken or broken in the other direction and too weak and requiring some kind of correction. Now, personally, I think that Eldar is not dead here. We just have to set our expectations at a more reasonable level here. We're certainly not the strongest army at the moment, but we do have multiple archetypes that are still viable competitively. And I actually think viable enough to win small tournaments. And if you get a little bit of luck on your side, even a large tournament can be won with these. The one I'm going to touch on most is MSU Aspect Host, which is an archetype that I've been playing a lot in the last balance window, and I think is still viable with a different way of thinking about the army. I think Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host, the more controlling playstyles. If you've watched my Aeldari Masterclass, you'll see that I kind of split up into a more aggressive active playstyle and a more passive controlling playstyle. I think both of those playstyles work really well in this meta, and I think you can still build them to deal with either your local meta or the meta as a whole. In teams, I do think that Windrider Host and Serpent's Brood, more skewed lists, will work pretty well, albeit, you know, it's arguable whether they make a 5 or even an 8 if you're truly trying to optimize, but a little bit of skewed tends to work better in teams than it does in singles. Let's focus in on singles though and try and break down the theory. So from a very top level, Aeldari have always leaned into having the best speed in the game. Combine that by having good lethality. It doesn't have to be the best lethality in the game, but good lethality. Speed allows you to deliver the lethality, which allows you to compound the damage and focus your fire into areas of the board in a way that most armies can't do. And then Eldar have always had weak durability to give the trade-off for that. Your army is going to fold. If you don't do enough damage when you do activate, then you're going to tend to die a lot quicker than your opponent. Take, for example, if an opponent has one chunky unit, you have to use 5 of your chunky units, 5 of your damaging units to kill their chunky unit, but 5 of their models could kill 5 of your units. So that's the way of looking at this. But you are able to deliver your 5 units into their one chunky unit before they can deliver their 5 models into your 5 units. That's the way that Eldar theory works. Now, this balance update has reduced our lethality because we have less points to work with, so less units to work with. It's reduced our durability because we have less units to work with, but our speed remains intact mostly. Now, in order to get around the weakening of our army, my theory is that we need to increase the number of units optimize the efficiency of how we use our points. So a lot of that is going to involve cutting characters away from the list and adding a higher volume of units so that we can kind of have a little bit more leeway to make it to the end of the game. Anytime that our lethality starts to struggle, Eldar are always pushed more into controlling playstyle. I don't think we have the strength as an army, and we sit in the meta where we can all in to win the game on turn 2, like maybe we are used to in the last 6 months of playing. Instead, we're looking to make it through the entire 5 turns of the game, using our units and drip feeding them to score our points. And when we need to, we're going to activate Crusher Flank in a way that we can't get attacked, and then rinse and repeat and work our way around the board. That is a much harder playstyle to play than the previous, little bit more blunt force trauma kind of army. Now we have to use our brain a lot more to squeeze out wins. We need to get the tempo bang on. I did a video on how to win any game of 40k, which talks a lot about tempo and momentum. It's in super detail over there, so make sure you go check out that video. It's got loads of views, I think like 20k views or something ridiculous. So check that out and see the theory behind that to help compound on the information that I'm going through here. So let's dive in a little bit more. So this particular meta is a little different from the previous 2 metas we've had. Previously, we've had a lot of vehicles without good invulnerable saves, very chunky meta that stuff like Fire Dragons works very well into. Now, we've got a lot of 4+ invulnerable saves all over the place, with extra defensive mechanisms layered on top. The Catan have a 5+ Feel No Pain. The Tzeentch big demons have the ability to reroll their saves very effectively. I've got Ultramarines at the bottom because Space Marines have come out super, super strong. They are pointed much more aggressively low than Eldar at the moment, so you're going to find that you have what feels like a lot less stuff than Space Marines, but we have a significant advantage on speed. Now what this meta is telling me, especially the top 2 pictures, the 4+ invulnerable big monsters, is that we're realistically not looking at stuff like Fire Dragons at the moment. Delivery of Fire Dragons without being able to reuse the unit results in the unit being quite inefficient with points, and also results in a lot of swing for that unit, where on average your output may be good and probably the best anti-vehicle, anti-monster in the army, but the swing between the highs and the lows is extremely high, removes consistency. So we're going to look for other options and combining other output in order to get through these big chunky things in the meta. So let's take a look at some of the units that I like in this meta for my Aspect Host list. I like the idea of using Dark Reapers, the ability to have long range, anti-tank, anti-monster firepower that also doubles up as being anti-heavy infantry. The 3 damage profile is very significant in this meta, and being able to kind of get a high volume of that so that you are a little bit take all comers, very effective. I really, really like Dark Reapers. Then we also got Swooping Hawks. Swooping Hawks have been good in the previous meta. They got a points increase, but they are still good here. And the main reason for that is they do mortal wounds and a high volume of low AP output. You can compound that with Aspect Hosts Ignore Cover. Warwalkers getting an additional point of AP onto them. You can use Lycus to go for 5+ lethal hits. There's a lot of stuff which synchronizes very well with Swooping Hawks. With the UKTC map changes, they're very good on UKTC. They're brilliant on WTC. You have to be a little bit careful with your model count on GW because it's not easy to hide if you're running 20 or 25 of these guys, but that is the kind of numbers that I'm looking at with my lists. Then we've got Shining Spears. Shining Spears I actually think were good before, but I think we wrote them off too quickly because we ran out of points in our list. But I actually think they should have made our optimized lists in the previous balance update. Shining Spears are a weird one because when you use them on the board and you try and activate their fighting into even a rhino, they're swinging and often don't even kill a single rhino. That feels bad, but between their shooting and their combat, their actual output is quite good. Their reach is excellent, able to go through walls with a high movement speed. I think they're actually a good unit overall, but they just have to be used with a little bit of care. You can't one-to-one trade Shining Spears. They have to be used as a finisher unit or as a contributing damage unit. Their profiles are excellent in this particular meta, and I'm a big fan of running Shining Spears. I'm so glad I get to say that. And then we've got 2 Phoenix Lords, which I personally think are very good. I think Lycus is slightly overcosted at the moment, but Lycus should be on this picture. I think the 5+ critical hits is very relevant for switching over into lethal hits. And yeah, so let's imagine Lycus is on there, but the 2 that I really like for this meta are Jane'Zar and Asuman. I think Asuman coming out of a Falcon with full rerolls to wound is actually quite excellent in this meta. The output and the ability to reuse that unit still, I think, is great. Having the Falcon allows you to play around with the transport, and for example, Howling Banshees and Jane'Zar can jump into that. You can still use Skyborn Sanctuary after the fight phase. It gives you a little bit more options and abilities to layer in quite high skill level moves, which is how you're going to win games. You pull off a few really good tricks. You can find yourself reusing some of these powerful units in a situation where we've been nerfed to avoid us being able to do it, and that can give you the momentum swing to just about clip and swing these singles games. Jane'Zar is fantastic. The reroll to wounds is extremely relevant and allows her to actually deal with big monsters and these chunky units with characters attached very, very effectively. She's even good into Catan. You can use the ignore modifier as an aspect host and end up actually doing a decent chunk of damage with her unit. So these are the foundations of what I'm trying to build on. Now, I mostly play UKTC and WTC, but we do play a little bit of GW over in the UK. And there are a couple of units which I think are actually quite good on GW terrain that's worth considering slipping into your lists. One is Fire Prisms. I think the long-range firepower of Fire Prisms is very relevant. On GW, you can get firing lanes across the board in a way you can't in other terrain formats. It's harder to hide, but it's also harder to shoot because of that. So running multiple Fire Prisms can work. The Avatar also has much better movement pathways through the plate terrain that you get in GW. So I think the distances between everything, the way that everything's open, tends to favor stuff like the Avatar and the Fire Prism on GW terrain. So consider having less Swooping Hawks. You don't need as many Dark Reapers, for example, but instead you can get something chunky like the Avatar, which is good anti-tank, anti-heavy infantry, and the Fire Prism, which is also both of those things, to try and supplement your list and get a bit more success. So my sample list that I'm going to show you here is going to be based on what I would take to a UKTC tournament or a WTC event. And I would run this in teams and singles. I think for me, this is going to be a list archetype that I think is going to be very consistent in singles, but you have to be a little bit careful if you're running this particular list, if you want to direct copy this particular list, because Eldar are not powerful enough that you can't run something that suits your playstyle. You have to test, optimize, and switch things in and out to get a list that suits what you're trying to achieve. Now, for me, I always look at the game as 5 turns and what I'm achieving and doing across those 5 turns. So in this particular list, I'm going to run through the list looking at that as the concept. So if we start off first, we have 2 times 5 Rangers and we have 1 unit of 5 Corsair Sky Reavers. I will go into a little bit more depth on the Corsair Sky Reavers, but these are your early game, holding your objectives and doing very early game screening and point scoring. You also have 2 units of 5 Swooping Hawks, which are your second layer to do exactly the same thing. And then you have a unit, 2 units of 5 Warp Spiders, which are your third layer to do those things. These are all units that you are willing to throw away in order to achieve either your point scoring, your screening, your move blocking, your skirmishing, and trading in the early game. You don't want to get through these 3 layers by turn 2 or 3, because then you're using your more expensive pieces in order to actually play the game. The next layer is our kind of output units. We're going to be having 2 units of 5 Dark Reapers on the board who can combine output with Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders, and also with the 2 units of 3 Shining Spears to kill targets. That's our next level that we can use. We have Jane'Zar and the 5 Banshees who are playing as a defensive mechanism, and in the very late game, they go in and try and attack and trade with the opponent. Oftentimes in the very late game, you can actually keep Jane'Zar and the Banshees alive to take you through to the end game, which is the style of play that I tend to prefer with these it's a really expensive unit, guys, like crazy, 200 points for that. Asuman and the 5 Avengers are playing out of the Falcon. This is another piece you want to be very careful with and try and conserve through to the end of the game, because it's a very powerful piece at the end of the game. There's a unit of 10 Dark Reapers and a unit of 10 Swooping Hawks, which are your real power units that can combine with a War Walker to get an additional point of AP and really slam in all your synergy. So you can go for your lethal, you can go for your stratagem to get sustained hits, lethal hits, ignore cover, depending on which unit you're using it in, and you can really ramp up the output of those two units to help you kill a hard target that's standing in front of you. The Dark Reapers, the unit of 10 I like to play out of reserves. You can tend to get a good firing lane. And if you throw on lethal hits for 1 CP with them, it's very easy to switch 2 failed hits after you reroll once to hit an aspect host, 2 6s, which are both become lethal hits, and suddenly the unit is extremely consistent at killing a vehicle down a firing lane. It's quite powerful, guys. That's a very useful tool to have, especially because the output on that unit also doubles up as being a very good heavy infantry killer. So this particular list covers all of the bases for me, covers the way I want to play each of the turns of my game, and has different output profiles to deal with everything in the army. The only thing you don't have is a lot of leeway. If you lose some of your heavy hitter units in the early game on an inappropriate trade, which is a very hard skill to develop, but on an inappropriate trade you can find yourself too far behind on momentum by turn 4 and 5 to either catch up on points, or you'll find yourself slipping behind on points when you were originally ahead on them. But realistically, this should have every tool to deal with any army in the meta. The only weakness we have is that the strength of Aeldari is a little bit low at the moment, but I would love to hear how you guys get on if you do try this exact list or a slight variation of this list. I think it's quite cool personally. It looks great on the board, and the theory is very, very sound. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk very quickly about Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host. I know a lot of you guys love this. The rule set is still so strong. Storm Guardians with 4 Warlock Conclave, and I would go in really hard with the Warlock Conclave on this, because I think you need your lethality to be high when you do want to do your spike damage. You have all of your control elements in there. You're trying to slow down the game, but when you want to go in and do damage with Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host, you need to be able to do that damage in a meta that's as chunky as this. So go in hard with your bricks and make sure you really pack in your synergy to maximize their output. And yeah, it hasn't really changed significantly. There's one unit in the Corsairs, which I'm going to get to in a second, which I think actually works incredibly well with Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host. So I'm excited to talk about that. But yeah, these lists haven't really changed here. Maybe run a little bit less on the Phoenix Lords just to compensate for the points increases. Make sure you have your 1 or 2 little skirmishing units and then your big bricks, and then just play out the game and hope your control allows you to make it to turn 5. This hasn't suited my particular playstyle. The leeway you get is even lower on Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host for mistakes. You can run out of stuff really fast and find yourself without resources at the end of the game. The aspect host list is a little bit more forgiving because your units, even your kind of mediocre aspect warrior units, can still do damage when combined, like your screening layer units, in a way that they don't really do in Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host. You really rely on getting your guardians to have maximum value through the game. So yeah, that's those two. Let's try and talk about some of these new units and how I'm planning on using them. Now, you may have seen that I had a unit of Corsair Sky Reavers in my aspect host list, and I personally love this unit. I think at 75 points, they're pointed fairly aggressively. If you look at the data sheet carefully, and I know people have not gone past the 5+ save and the 12-inch movement, they've just read that and stopped reading and assumed the rest of it. Look at the data sheet, guys. You can take a blaster and you can take a fusion gun. That's 2 AP4 weapons. Then you can also take a blast pistol on the leader, and then you've got 9 strength 4 AP2 -1 attacks, and they have the grenade keyword. This unit scouts 7 and moves 12. This unit is the single best unit for us to deal with the combi lieutenant guy, the guy who is 70 points and for some reason has not received any nerfs for 2 years and is in every single Space Marine list and has the most ridiculous rule set. But this one character completely shifts the momentum of any game you play into Space Marines against any army. but particularly Eldar, now that Eldar are a little bit weaker. If that guy forces you to keep putting a unit on the middle objective over and over again, because he's standing on the middle objective, he reacts and moves back into heroic intervention protection range, he's a nightmare to deal with. Now, you can use a unit of Warp Spiders. If he AOCs, you're not killing him. You can use a unit of Swooping Hawks. If he... you have a chance of actually not killing him, even between the grenade pack and the AP0 weaponry. A 3+5+ save, 5+ fuel no pain is really tough to get through. If you're running the Hawk's talent, you may not even wrap him. The Corsair Sky Reavers, Scout 7, move 12 or 12+2, so 14. That is 21 inches of movement. They're still able to shoot their guns, they're still able to grenade. That unit is better at killing the Combi Lieutenant once they fully wrap him. That is a phenomenal tool for 75 points, because this can be your first early game fast unit that you use to achieve something. 75 points is an absolute bargain. Now, would I run loads and loads of these guys? Probably not, but even the unit of 10 is not bad in the Corsair detachments, guys. But for our Aspect Host list, I love a single unit of 5 Corsair Sky Reavers. They give you an answer to the Combi Lieutenant, they give you an answer to a high efficiency early game play, and their output is not bad for 75 points. I think people have written them off way too fast. Having 2 AP4 guns is huge, having 3 Strength 8 guns is huge in this meta. Alright, let's move on to the next one, which is a unit which I love in the Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host units, armies. So those armies tend to run these big bricks of Guardians, which you try and layer on your buffs onto, both for output and defensively. The Starfang will give you an extra defensive buff, which is a -1 to hit, which is very, very kind. It's easy to activate. Start of the opponent's shooting phase, you pick one of your units that are visible to the Starfang within 36 inches, so extremely easy to activate, and you can give yourself -1 to hit. If you can't use the defensive buff effectively, I don't think the Starfang is actually worth it in your army. But if you can use the defensive buff effectively, the Starfang is actually a decent mobile platform to do a bit of damage, a bit of skirmishing, and also a defensive buff. It has a disintegrator cannon and the Starfang grenade launcher, which gives you 6 -3 on D3+3, and the D3 gun has blast. It has assault. That is a pretty decent profile for a 75-point Viper type unit. Talking about the Viper's still not good, but this guy I think will find his way into a fair number of lists, and the conversation at 75 points between Sky Reavers and Starfang, super interesting discussion, and I'm just glad we have something in the 75 points bracket, since Striking Scorpions got nerfed up to 85. Why did they get nerfed up to 85? But they did. So yeah, Starfang, not bad at all, guys. I'd definitely have a little look if you can squeeze that in, and I would run one in any Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host list. Perfect. The third one is Prince Uriel with some Corsair Void Reavers. Now, obviously this is a must take if you're running the Corsair detachments. I personally don't think they're extremely viable competitively, but they're quite cool. But in Seer Council and Guardian Battle Host, especially Guardian Battle Host, I think there's huge value in running Prince Uriel with 5 Corsair Void Reavers. Having the redeploy on some infiltrating Guardian units is really strong in my opinion, and he is a really good beat stick. I think it's 95 points, 65 points for your Corsairs, 160 points for a unit that full rerolls to hit, has sustained hits, and yeah, I think that unit is a nice little beat stick for your non-aspect host armies, which need just a little bit of melee pressure, which they can apply. So running Janezar and 5 Banshees and running Prince Uriel with 5 Corsairs will cover your melee bases for these otherwise very shooty heavy power armies. Yeah, I really like Uriel. Is he better than Janezar and 5 Howling Banshees and Aspect Host? Probably not, but he is a fair bit cheaper than that. So I could see this particular unit making its way into quite a lot of lists, but it's also a little bit expensive. You also might consider at that point in list building that you're probably better off with 2 units of Corsair Void Reavers just running around, or even a unit of Corsair Void Reavers and a unit of Howling Banshees running around rather than Uriel with 5 Corsair Void Reavers. So there's a question of efficiency here, but I think in Guardian Battle Host this is a great pick to take with your infiltrating Guardian units. And Let's see, have we got anything else? I think that might be everything, guys. I hope that was useful. Now, there's a lot of discussion to be had and a lot of testing to be done. The Fireside Discord is really active on the Aeldari side. We've been talking about a lot of this, and a lot of the ideas that are in this presentation are from that Discord. So if you want to join, make sure you get in at the Phoenix Lord level membership. It's called Discord level on YouTube, and that'll give you access to the Discord. But I would also love to hear your comments, your questions, your theory, your experiences with Aeldari, because I'm still trying to work this out myself. I love my aspect host list. I think it's really strong, but I know there's a bit more work that needs to be done. That list still feels like I have one of a lot of things that I'm trying to make sure work in the correct place. If any of you have had any more success with Aeldari, even though we're at 38% win rate, I really do believe that we can make something work here in the meta, and I'm hoping to see that win rate go up, and I'm hoping that this video is going to be part of that. Thank you all so much for listening to 40k Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and as always, I will see you guys next time by the Fireside. Take care. Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop us a comment, check out the YouTube members area, and we look forward to seeing you again next time by the Fireside.